And it's now the bottom of the hour and folks are still trickling in. So we will be kicking off in 1 to 2 minutes here as we give folks to transition from probably their last Zoom meeting. Hey, Amy. Hey, Katie. Hey, Madeline and Megan. Thanks for connecting. We'll give folks 1 more minute here and then we'll jump into the content and we'll have you folks out of here, hopefully having learned something new about the supply chain labor market at the top of the hour. All right. Hey, Desiree, thanks for joining us. We're going to be kicking off in about 15 seconds here as final folks connect to the webinar. Thank you all for taking the time to join this WorkStep webinar today. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to submit them in chat and they will be relayed to the presenters via a member of our team. And we today are going to be talking about the supply chain labor market in spring of 2021 and why we as a group are seeing the most challenging supply chain labor market ever. What other folks in similar positions are doing to address it, how WorkStep is building technology to help your teams address the current challenge, and where we see this market going next. So we'll jump into the content now. Before we get into that, why should you listen to us? And who are we? My name is Dan Johnston. I am the co-founder and CEO of WorkStep. I have been a warehouse manager previously, and so I have been in your seat, and I have felt the challenges associated with supply chain workforce acquisition and retention. Justin Butler, my co-founder and our CTO, will also be speaking today from the technology side, and he will introduce himself in a bit. What do we do at WorkStep? Most of you are WorkStep customers. Some of you are just interested in the topic. At WorkStep, we build technology solutions that help teams like yours hire and retain their frontline workers. And on the call today, we've got attendees from a host of different industrial and supply chain organizations, but you all look relatively the same. You all are in mostly large companies. Almost everybody is within an organization that oversees more than 1,000 frontline workers. Every single one of you is in some kind of manufacturing or distribution. You work for companies who make and move products. And you are all facing challenges sourcing and retaining your frontline talent at scale. And so what we want to do is get this group together and have a discussion about what's happening in the supply chain labor market and what we can be doing together. What are the best practices to address that market? So today we'll talk about that labor market. WorkStep will cover how we're building technologies to help you given the current context. And then we'll answer the question of what happens next, which I'm sure is on your mind. So diving into that market, as all of you know, heading into 2021, the labor market was already challenging. Nobody had an overflow of applicants or, very rarely no challenges at all with retention. And, a big reason for that is there's just been a boom of the space over the last decade. So, demand for warehouse workers over the previous decade is up 40%. And supply hasn't moved nearly as much, meaning the market has been, spread tighter, mostly driven by the boom of e-commerce. And the elephant in the room, the 50,000 pound gorilla in the room, is Amazon, right? Amazon now has over 1 million employees worldwide. It probably feels like Amazon has moved in next door to nearly every single one of your buildings and has sucked up a large part of the available supply chain and industrial labor pool in your area. And this has only sort of further strained that challenge, especially because in many cases they offer incentives and new hire bonuses to attract workers away from potentially your organizations. And that made things already hard. But in the last 2 months, our customers, of which we have hundreds of manufacturing and supply chain companies, have been coming to us with a lot of the same questions that you probably have. What happened to that organic applicant flow in my ATS? I was getting 30 applications a week for this role in January, and now we're getting 4. Why are we having so much trouble converting those applicants to hires? And why is retaining our new hires so hard right now? And all of these questions are leading to pains, right? We are understaffed. We are doing forced OT, which is leading to even more turnover. We are paying more overtime than we ever have, or we're using temp staffing more than we ever wanted to. And those are causing real organizational problems. And everybody is wondering, why is this happening? What can we do about it? And how long is this going to last? So we'll go through those answers today. So you're not alone. Since January, there's been roughly 50% fewer job seekers per job opening in this category than there were at the start of the year, which is a massive reduction in the available labor force per unit of demand. And as that's happened, as an effect of that, I suppose, it's gotten more expensive to recruit. So you can see that, basically job advertising platforms have increased pricing as much as 60% since January, just because the Amazons of the world, your companies, they still need to hire, but there's less available people. So when supply goes down and demand goes up, price goes up. And so it's gotten more challenging to recruit. It's gotten more expensive to recruit, and it's gotten more competitive with other organizations offering new hire incentives to keep your people. And so why is that happening? We will go into each of these sort of 4 underlying reasons. There are 2 effects that are ongoing since the start of COVID. There are 2 effects that are brand new. 2 of these further decrease workforce supply. 2 of them increase workforce competition. And the compounding impact of these 4 factors is what has created the tightest supply chain labor market that we've ever seen. So each of those 4 factors, we touched on this earlier. E-commerce continues to increase. In 2020, basically we saw a 10-year step forward of e-commerce, which just, in general, moves jobs from endpoints, retail stores, to midpoints, distribution centers, and increases that competition for labor in the supply chain. And that is only continuing to increase in 2021 rather than stepping back. Second of all, the second sort of ongoing effect of COVID is there is still a missing segment from the workforce. There are still 4 million workers in the United States who are not working today because of fears about getting or spreading the coronavirus. This is decreasing, but it's not gone. So demand is still up and surging, right? Consumer spending is high, consumption of goods is high. There is still a segment of the workforce population that is on the sidelines. These are the continuing effects of COVID. Then the 2 new effects are the economy is reopening. So sectors like hospitality, entertainment, food service that shed a lot of jobs and potentially repurpose talent into manufacturing and logistics roles during the pandemic are starting to aggressively hire again. And so while not every worker can flip back and forth between these sectors, some do. And so when these sort of sectors of the economy turn back on all of a sudden in February across the country, that's pulling supply away from your roles. And that's sort of a new force that's really kicked up in the last couple of months. And then the final kicker, while great for workers and recipients, is the stimulus checks. So the 3rd round of economic impact payments went out in March, and those included $1,400 per person plus $1,400 per dependent, meaning a family of 5 could have received $7,000 in economic stimulus payments. And now that doesn't replace a job, certainly. And it has a very useful purpose in terms of continuing to keep, people in their residence and keeping the economy going, but it also does, on the margins, decrease labor availability, because a worker who's out of work or thinking about leaving a role can maybe wait a month or two before finding their next role, whereas previously they would have been job seeking immediately. So those four impacts are compounding to make this moment incredibly challenging for both hiring and retention. And in this market, every employer needs to be data informed, right? Everybody else, other employers, Amazon is throwing money at the problem with incentives. And so what you can be doing and what we can be doing together is moving fast, having a differentiated candidate experience, and keeping the new hires you do make. And that last point is really the kicker, which is, how do I retain the hires that I do have when hiring is so challenging? And so, in this market, Amazon sucking up talent, economic stimulus payments going out, companies like Uber throwing literally hundreds of millions of dollars of incentives to pull in hourly talent. We want to provide technology that helps you compete. And so now I'll turn it over to Justin, our CTO. We'll talk about what we've done over the last quarter to help your teams compete in this market. And then we'll talk a little bit about what happens next.
Thanks, Dan. As you mentioned, my name is Justin Butler, and I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders of WorkStep. And I'm excited to talk to you today about a few things my team has been working on lately that your teams can take advantage of now. I'll start with a little background. I got my start in software at Google, and one of the things I've always taken with me from that experience was their ability to effectively apply technology to really challenging problems. And so today with WorkStep, I'm constantly thinking about how we can use technology to solve big problems in a supply chain in the related industries. And I've been partnering really closely with some of the country's largest employers to understand the issues that are cropping up today. Honestly, probably better than anyone ever has. How can, for example, predictive analytics drive meaningful change in an organization that's battling against the circumstances of the current labor market, as Dan's been talking about? And I hope to tease that out a bit over the next few slides. One thing that data has shown us, and that our customers have been able to leverage really effectively this year, is the need to move fast and with surgical precision throughout the hiring funnel. I have a degree in statistics. I could tell you that the math gets pretty complicated, but the outcomes are not. In many ways, the reality today is you snooze, you lose. And so in order to be fast and precise, what we've heard from the experts in the industry is that the most important thing to do is keep on top of trends as they're happening, and to identify bottlenecks or process inefficiencies that could be slowing you down, causing you to miss out on good fit hires who may be getting offers elsewhere. And so a lot of the updates that we've released this quarter have been designed to help folks keep their finger on the pulse of these trends and access data in an easy to digest format. So for example, at first here, we have a snapshot of the analytics tab within WorkStep Hire, which is showing you velocity and conversion metrics for the hiring funnel across your organization. Now, what's really key about this dashboard is the ability to slice and dice the data any way you want, drilling down by location, by role, by time frame, week over week, month over month, to allow you and your teams to identify the areas for prioritizing improvements. For example, you can see in this screenshot here that Portland is lagging Seattle in the 6-week trailing average of time to hire by a few days. It might not be a surprising difference until we notice that in the last row here at the bottom, that the time to hire in Portland has actually been slowly increasing week over week from its former kind of stable value of approximately 14 days back in March to now almost shy of a month just in the last week. And if you're like me, you're looking at that and going, alarm bells are going off. I've got to call up Portland and see how I can help. So we know we need to move faster and to improve conversion rates, but how can we do that? Let's break it down, because there have been a lot of learnings in our space over the last few months. Starting with velocity, what we've heard from experts like yourselves is you've got to streamline the interview process. And that's for a couple reasons. First is, of course, just to adapt to new restrictions related to COVID. Not everybody everywhere can just come on site for group orientation anymore, and we should be able to accommodate for that. The second reason is just to meet candidates faster. It's about getting out in front of all the other opportunities available to workers these days, as Dan explained. And the second thing is conversion rates, as we were seeing on the slide there. To me, conversion rates is all about a superior candidate experience. Your teams are going to want more flexibility to meet with candidates. For example, just to give candidates the ability to self-schedule, what could be easier than that? And this is something that WorkStep has taken seriously about the candidate experience since we got started. Clear communication and reminders to candidates. They're more likely to attend, you're minimizing ghosting, and you're reducing the back and forth by automatically handling things like rescheduling. So if you want to make these kinds of optimizations a reality for your organization, I'm excited to share about the new flexible settings that we've added to WorkStep Hire to streamline interviewing candidates. In particular here, I wanted to call out an example from our new interview types menu, which now includes the video interview, for example, via Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Going back to that superior candidate experience, the system is going to automate your ability to meet with a qualified candidate today over video conference. The screenshot here is demonstrating that WorkStep gives the candidate a full rundown of everything that they're going to need to know about the interview, no matter how you're conducting them these days. So you're not missing connections, you're minimizing ghosting, you're getting out in front, and that's the way to squeeze more conversion out of a really tight market. So we've been talking a lot about optimizing the hiring process for the current recruiting climate, but there's one thing that's more challenging than an interview no-show, and that's job abandonment. What we're hearing is that increased turnover in the first 90 days is compounding in its negative effects, because there's not only kind of the sunk onboarding costs, but it also then puts even more pressure on recruiting. Luckily, this is exactly the kind of thing that our customers have been using our tooling to help diagnose. Now, any employee hired through WorkStep Hire is tracked through Retain automatically, but customers of the WorkStep Retain product get visibility into their retention patterns for their entire workforce, which is where things start to get really powerful. Those organizations are able to see trend lines by region, by facility, by role, month over month, quarter over quarter, milestone by milestone, and benchmark those data points across their organization and across industry averages. We're slicing, we're dicing. Sometimes I feel like I'm selling knives on TV, but what we're hearing from industry experts is that if your organization is not able to get proper visibility into exactly what's happening with retention, then you can't expect to be able to properly diagnose and treat the issues until long after they've already taken root and are impacting the bottom line, which is what we're aiming to avoid. For example, what I want to call out, what we're seeing here in the screenshot is that there's two different ways to present retention. And on one tab, we've got standard retention. It's labeled monthly retention, which is the typical industry way to calculate retention for a given period. How many people were employed at the start of the period, and then how many of those folks remain at the end of the period. But what we're also showing here is milestone retention, which is a super important way to look at it. For folks hired in a given month, how many of those folks are making it to their 7th day, to their 15th day, to their 30th day, for their 90 day. And this is really key, because what we're hearing from our customers is that job abandonment and first 90-day retention are some of the biggest challenges facing the industry. And this is by far the best way to digest the data for this purpose. The last thing I wanted to call out is that this same module has a section that shows internal and external benchmarks for each of the primary leading indicators of retention rate. And customers that have tracked their organizations with us for even just a few months have been able to leverage this information to get predictive about the trends in the segments of their workforce. For example, a dip in 30-day satisfaction or workforce segment that maybe starts to lag the company-wide benchmark for responsiveness, say, is going to experience a corresponding bump in 30 to 90-day turnover in the next cycle. And then you can get ahead of that. So hopefully this gives you a sense for how organizations, much like your own, have been riding out these turbulent times, getting more efficient and tactical than ever before, with a little help from some of the cool new tools that we've released recently. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dan to take a look toward the future.
Thanks, Justin. So that is what WorkStep is doing to help our partners in this challenging time. It's also a bit about what sort of best practices all companies are following in terms of, being an employer of choice in a very, very, very challenging labor market. But I'm sure what you all are wondering now is, what happens next? How long does this last? And maybe what is WorkStep doing to continue to help our companies sort of fight back as this sort of strained labor market continues? So we talked about 4 drivers of the challenging labor market, 2 of which decrease supply and 2 of which increase demand. The good news is that 2 of those are projected to dissipate as the pandemic fades, right? So many of you, I'm sure, are maybe one shot deep in your vaccination schedule. But as vaccination rates increase domestically, we should see those 4 million workers on the sidelines start to come back to work. We also know that, or we also would assume that the economic stimulus payments, COVID-related stimulus payments, we're likely sort of seeing the trailing impact of that March round now and are unlikely to see another round soon. So those 2 sort of impacts that have been decreasing worker supply should wane over the coming quarter. Now, the boom of e-commerce and demand for supply chain and manufacturing talent and the competition from other job sectors will remain. So the market is going to stay tight. It just might not be as tight as it's been for the last month. So, we expect to see dynamics in the market that are roughly similar to what you would have seen in late 2020. And that brings us back to what WorkStep is doing next. We continue to focus our technology on retention, because over the last decade, the only thing that has been consistent in the space is that turnover has been increasing. And that's for a ton of reasons: flexible work alternatives, decreasing societal pressure on alignment of a career to a single employer. But when you can take turnover down, you have to make less hires, productivity goes up, safety incidents go down, workforce satisfaction goes up. So we want to help you hire, of course, because that's what you need today. But we're also focusing our long-term plan on how we help you keep those hires that you are making. And so we're doing a couple things there in the next quarter. One is helping your teams identify issues, figure out how to action those issues, assign that action to an owner internally, and then track that action through to completion. So in a case like this, where there's a challenge with mandatory overtime, which I'm sure a lot of you have right now, how do you have the right person engage with that worker feedback to not only ease the concerns and resolve the challenge for this individual worker, but also ensure that, or put the company in a position that the next worker in the door doesn't have the same issue. So taking workforce feedback, determining the right organizational action with best practices, assigning that action to a specific member of your HR leadership team, and then tracking completion is how we are helping our partners in the coming quarter solve those turnover challenges, especially in those new hire populations that are such high turnover. And then we've been laser focused on that new hire population, as mentioned, but we know that turnover comes from everywhere. And in fact, it's much more painful to lose a long tenured employee than a brand new employee in many cases. And so we want to help you, yes, capture feedback from and prevent turnover from your new hire population, but we also want to help you learn from the feedback of your more tenured employees. What are they seeing? What is changing for them? What could cause them to leave? How can they help your new hires stay? So we've introduced this notion of recurring check-ins with a broader workforce population that allows you to monitor trends in workforce satisfaction and predictors of turnover well beyond an employee's first year. So those are two of the changes we're making the coming quarter to help your teams retain employees over a longer period of time and decrease that sort of need to always be on the hiring hamster wheel. That's the end of our content today. If you have any questions, these are our emails. If you just want to share your perspective on the challenges today, we are also available. Your account manager from WorkStep, if you have one, is also available. Or we can hang out and answer questions either via unmuting the group or questions that have been submitted via chat. So thank you for your time. It's about 4 minutes to the top of the hour. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate your partnerships, and we're available for questions both now or later.